Turn your Bibles to the second chapter of the book of Habakkuk. Habakkuk chapter 2, the Old Testament. We're culminating a series today entitled The Three Components of Vision. The Three Components of Vision. Today we come to the third component of vision. And we're looking at a foundational text here in Habakkuk chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. Notice, hear the word of the Lord. I will stand my watch and set myself on the rampart and watch to see what he will say to me, and what I will answer when I am corrected. And then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it will speak, and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. Now, I don't like to just jump into a text and you not understand the context of the text. There's the text, and then there's the pretext, and then there's the context. And to get the context of this particular text, this is where Habakkuk the prophet, knowing the hard-heartedness of his fellow countrymen, he asked God, how long will this intolerable condition, how long can it continue? It was the condition of the people that Habakkuk was called to minister to that actually created a burden in his heart. Say burden. Do you know that every vision is born out of a burden? If you don't have a burden for anything, forget a vision. Vision is born out of burden. There has to be something that becomes a heaviness to your soul, where you ought to start saying something yourself, that somebody ought to do something. And then God will turn around and start looking at you and say, well, what about you? Maybe I'll drop a vision in you. Vision is born out of a burden. It's born out of a burden. And you ought to have a burden that I don't want to keep living, struggling the way I am. I don't want to see another child to go through what I went through. And out of that burden comes a vision. So Habakkuk had a burden for his people. He had a burden for him. And he asked the Lord some questions. He had some questions for God. Have you ever been in a situation where you can't really ask it from man, because you know man doesn't have the answer, and they're asking the same question, everybody's scratching their head? And so Habakkuk, being a prophet of the Lord, he goes to the Lord with some questions. He asked one in Habakkuk chapter 1 in verse 2. He said, Lord, how long shall I cry and you will not hear? You ever felt that you've been crying out to God to do something in your life or in the life of somebody that you love, and you haven't seen any change, and you saying, Lord, how long? How long am I going to cry out to you and nothing is happening? Anybody know what I'm talking about? And then in chapter 1 as well, in verse 13, the second part of that, he asks, why do you look on those who deal treacherously and hold your tongue when the wicked devours a person more righteous than he? How can you sit back, God, and watch bad people do bad things to good people, and you don't even do anything? Why do you let a good woman get battered in a marriage? Why do you let a good brother be stepped on by a... Why, God? Why? Why would you do that, God? And so Habakkuk, the prophet, has some questions. He has some questions. And he has enough wisdom to know that after you ask God a question, give him a room to speak to you. And so here he picks it up. And I want to read those same verses to you of Habakkuk chapter 2 in the contemporary English version of the scriptures. Here's what it says. He'd asked, remember the context, he just asked God those questions, and now he says, while standing guard on the watchtower, I waited for the Lord's answer. The Lord's answer, what the questions that I'd ask him, before explaining the reason for my complaint. And then the Lord told me, I will give you my message in the form of a vision. Write it clearly enough to be read at a glance. And at the time, I have decided my words will come true. At what time? At the time that I have decided my words will come true. And he says, you can trust what I say about the future. It may take a long time, but keep on waiting. It will happen. There are three components of vision. The first component of vision is hindsight. You don't even know how to have a vision if you've never taken time to look back. Hindsight deals with reflection. You got to look back and see what has been. If you don't understand what has been, you'll miss the mark today. That's why you need a mama and a daddy and grandma and grandpa, so that you understand that there are some old landmarks that you need to hold on to. There are some values that you need to reach back to. You can't get so contemporary and so sophisticated in this modern day culture that you think that what they had was old-timey and old school. It's crazy now that we got all of these sophisticated methods of communications and technology, and we don't even know what's going on in the lives of folks in our own house nowadays. You got to wait to get a text response back from somebody in your own house, where back in the day, Mama just hollered through the house, Henry, Johnny. They'd stand out on the porch when the street lights were getting ready to come on. Call your name. And they weren't going to stand out there and call you 10 times. If you're going to have vision, you have to understand something about hindsight. Hindsight is the first component of vision. If you don't understand your history, you're doomed to repeat it. You have to understand something. That's why you get a glance. If you're running a race, don't ever ignore your hindsight of who's coming up behind you. You got to always be aware of hindsight. The second component is insight. Insight gives you perspective of where you are right now. Insight, it gives you perspective of where you are right now. And then the third component of what we're talking about is foresight. Foresight. Foresight is about your outlook. Your outlook. It's about your vision. Foresight, this is prophetic in its nature. Hindsight is an understanding of a situation or an event only after it has happened or developed. That's hindsight. But insight is seeing from within. That's when a light turns on, when you've been meditating on something, and all of a sudden now it dawns on you. You have this eureka moment when you have insight. You've been thinking about something, mulling it over and over in your mind and your heart, and then you get insight. You deal with hindsight, insight, and then the third component is foresight. Foresight, foresight. Foresight deals with the whole idea that you cannot possess what you do not foresee. You cannot possess what you do not foresee. And the reason that you can't possess what you don't foresee is because if you don't foresee it, you won't prepare for it. You don't get what you want in life, you get what you prepare for. So foresight allows you to see something that is coming down the road so that you back up and start preparing for it. Foresight is a part of providence. Say providence. The word providence comes from a Latin word providential, which means foresight. It means prudence. Prudence. The word pro means ahead, and then videre means to see. So when you have prudence, or when there is providence, it is seeing ahead. It is seeing ahead. If you don't see ahead, you won't prepare for what's coming ahead. It's very, very connected to the same word provision. Say provision. Provision is a late 14th century word meaning providing beforehand. Provision is about providing beforehand. This originally dealt with having an ecclesiastical appointment that was made before a position was vacant. Somebody seeing the provision. They were seeing that this is not going to last always, so I'm going to make provision so that before this gives out, I've already provided. Provision has to do with seeing ahead. It has to do with foresight, not insight, not hindsight. This is about looking ahead, ahead, and vider, which means to see ahead. Provision is about seeing this thing ahead of time. Can you imagine how much simplified people's lives would be if somebody had only made provision ahead of time for someone who died in their life, for somebody that leaves an organization, for somebody that walks out of the marriage, and the only reason that we get hurt and stunned is because we had no foresight of this. We had no seeing ahead of what was going to happen. The old French word provision, say provision again. Provision is foresight, is preparation from the verb provider, which means to look ahead. This thing is about looking ahead. You got to look ahead. That's why there's a windshield. There's a windshield in the front of your car. That's a nice size. Can you imagine how wide your windshield is compared to the size of your rear view hindsight? You spend a very little time looking back, but there'll be a whole lot of time that you're looking ahead out of your front window so that you can see ahead. And when you live your life looking in the rearview mirror, whining and crying and belly aching and mealy mouthing over what happened in your rearview mirror, you're going to have an accident and mess up what you got going on now. If you don't learn to look out of the bigger view, which is the windshield, instead of the rear view. You got to be able to look ahead. You don't merely look where you are, you got to look where you are going. Wouldn't it be foolish driving down the expressway? I know the speed limit is 55, but driving at 75 down the freeway, and if you were to open the door to look down at the pavement to see where you are, wouldn't that be stupid to be riding your car and looking down at the road instead of looking out of the windshield? Wouldn't that be crazy? So when you talk about this looking ahead, provision is about looking ahead. When a man provides for his family, he looks ahead. It's not just about bringing home bread today. It's looking ahead to say that if I break my leg tomorrow, I want to be able, I want my family to eat. I want to look ahead and I want to prepare some things ahead of time. That's what provision is. It's looking ahead and seeing a need and then providing that need even before you get there. So to provide, it means to look ahead and to see the need before you have the need so that you make the necessary preparations in advance to meet the need when you'll need the need. And so another related word to this word provision is the word improvision. Improvision. Say improvision. Improvision means for want of forethought. For want of forethought. Or it means lacking foresight. That's improvision. It means lacking foresight or either for want of forethought. When there's improvision. You probably recognize the word better if I said improvise. Improvise. But means not. It means not looking ahead. It really means not looking. When you have to improvise, it means you hadn't planned on this happening and now you got to try to shuffle around to do something because you hadn't banked on this. Now there are times when improvisation is a wonderful thing. If it's jazz, and you don't have the notes on the paper and you do what's called improvising, there's some jazz improvisation that you don't just write, play what you see on the sheet music. You play what you feel right at that moment. You got to be in a groove. Anybody know what I'm talking about? There's some time that you got to learn how to improvise. Because there's certain things, no matter how well you look ahead, there'll be some things that'll happen that you never could have planned on. There'll be some things you never anticipated that an animal would run out in the street and that would be an accident, and so now you got to improvise. You never thought that when you were on your way to work that your tire would burst today. But now you got to improvise. This was not in the plan because I didn't see this one coming. And so you can't be stumped. You got to know how to make, you got to have an improvision. where it means that this lacked forethought. I didn't realize that this could have happened. You didn't see yourself getting sick in your 20s or your 30s. You didn't see anything happening to your marriage in the first 10 or 12 years or 15 years. You didn't see that this would happen to you or to your child. You never saw this coming, so how can you prepare for something that you didn't see coming? And now you got to stagger around and now improvise. It means I didn't see it coming, and I got to come up with something right now to figure out how to do this thing. And so that's what happens when you don't foresee. You see with your mind. You don't really see with your eyes. You see with your mind. You see with your mind. Because if your thinking is not right, it'll misinterpret what you see. It really will. How much better do you think that your life would be today if you had only looked ahead 10 years ago and prepared better for today? I mean, had you had wisdom 10 years ago to start eating better, you'd feel better now. I mean, you honestly would, you know. I mean, had you done some things dietarily 10 years ago, your waistline wouldn't be. I mean, rarely do we ever have to have alteration where we have to have stuff taken in unless we've been sick. Most of the time it's to have it let out. And we have to improvise because we didn't see this coming, and you know, we ain't got all this money to be wasting on new clothes, and so you got to let some stuff out. You got to split that thing and try to let, hopefully there's enough material to be able to let out. When you talk about these three components of vision, it's about hindsight, insight, and foresight in three dimensions. The God who was, who is, and who is to come. Hindsight, insight, and foresight. God is on every side. Logos is hindsight. It's what's already written, what God has already said. That's logos. It is the word. It's hindsight that gives us perspective. Rhema is insight. For right now, it is a spoken word that God gives us for insight of what to do right now. That's rhema. That's rhema. But then the third dimension is prophecy. Prophecy is divine utterance that gives us foresight for what is to come. Foresight for what is to come. I mean, just think about this on a DVD player or CD player. You'll find the thing that says rewind or review, which is about the past. You rewind, you review, that's reflection that happens in the past. Then you have play, which is the present. You want to play this thing right now. You play in the present, and then you fast forward for the future. There's certain things that you want to skip over to see. You want a preview of it. So sometimes if I get a CD, and instead of taking the time to listen to everything, I'll listen to the first few measures, then fast forward to the next song to see if anything on here is any good. It helps me to make a decision as to what I'm going to do with it, and you have to fast forward through some things. Anybody ever give you something and you have to skim through it? You fast forward through it to see whether this is any good or not. And so you have to either rewind or you play or you fast forward. Please remember this, memory replays the past. Memory replays the past, but imagination preplays the future. And these are the two most powerful functions of your mind, is that memory replays the past, but imagination preplays the future. You got to have imagination. You can go no place in reality that you've not first visited in imagination. And remember that sight is a function of the eyes, but vision is a function of the heart. And because you have a passion at the start of something doesn't mean that you're going to have purpose at the finish of it. Let me say that again to you. That just because you have passion at the start of something doesn't mean that you'll have purpose at the finish of it. I want you to notice something in Genesis chapter 22. God revealed himself in that place as Jehovah Jireh, the Lord my provider. Jehovah Jireh. Say Jehovah Jireh. If God has ever provided for you, just slip your hand up. Just if he's ever provided. Look around. Look at folks testifying all over the place. God is a provider. I'm telling you, he is Jehovah Jireh, the Lord my provider. The Lord is a way maker out of no way. He is a provider. He is Jehovah Jireh. And this is where God first revealed himself as Jehovah Jireh, Genesis chapter 22. And this is the account when Abraham was about to sacrifice his only son, Isaac, on Mount Moriah. And then God provided a ram in the bushes. Remember, wisdom, from the Germanic word wissen, it means knowing what we saw. Knowing what we saw, that's wisdom. It is knowing what we saw. And then vision, from the Germanic word vision, it means knowing what we see. That has to do with present tense. But I want to give you something that's beyond that. I want to teach you a new word today. Is that all right? But far beyond the brilliance of the artists who painted the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper and the numerous other enduring masterpieces, Leonardo da Vinci was also a master innovator. He really was. With his keen mind's eye, he looked around him from unprecedented angles to see what was not already in the society that could be there. And do you know, in Leonardo da Vinci's studio, he left a collection of codices, very, very detailed notes of drawings, of inventions that centuries later became the bicycle, the glider, the airplane, the helicopter, the tank, the robot, the gyroscope, the life preserver, the parachute, and the crane. Detailed images of these were sketched out in the codices that he left, Leonardo da Vinci, hundreds of years before they were discovered, before they were invented. And he saw it ahead of time. That's called foresight. He foresaw the marvels of engineering and industry that the world wouldn't begin to appreciate or to develop until long after he was gone. I mean, 500 plus years later, the scope of what this quintessential Renaissance man envisioned, it was really hard to fathom. It's amazing. And when asked about the secret of his genius, Leonardo da Vinci would characteristically respond with a phrase that he conceived, and he adopted this as his personal motto. Are you ready for it? This is a new phrase I want to teach you. It's called sapere vedere. Sapere vedere. But the phrase contains the Latin sapere, which means knowing how, and then vedere, which means to see. So when you put it together, sapere vedere means knowing how to see. Knowing how to see, sapere vedere, knowing how to see. Leonardo da Vinci knew how to see. He knew how to see, sapere vedere. Most people that have, they have wissen, which is wisdom, which is I know what I saw. Wissen is I know what I see. But sapere vedere is knowing how to see. It was just the masterful sculptor that knew how to have sapere vedere. He would see the image of the man locked in the hunk of marble, and he simply removed the hunks of marble that did not belong to the image that he could already see. And so his whole thing was to remove the pieces to free the man from the block of marble. And that's how he was able to chisel so effective, because he had sapere vedere. He knew how to see. Very few people know how to see. But people with sapere vedere, they look backwards and forward as well as inward. And then they are capable of believing and seeing what others do not, because of their ability to know how to see, sapere vedere. They know how to see. They know how to see. The question is, do you know how to see? Do you know how to see? You got to learn to look beyond the clouds and understand, instead of saying, I had a gloomy day, above the clouds the sun always shines. You got to have sapere vedere to know how to see. When somebody dies and you're looking at that as an end, no, death is a graduation. It's a promotional exercise. You got to know how to see. When your child gets up and moves out, when you have saparividare, you understand that this was not my child anyway. God made me the steward of their love. He gave me the privilege of being able to raise them and put some things in them, but they belong to God from the very beginning. I'm not the one who made them wonderfully and fearfully. They're God's. Saparividare makes it where you can release them and let them go because you understand how to see through God's eye that this wasn't yours to begin with. It came through you, but it's not of you. Saparividare, you got to understand how to see. You look at something when you're immature and get jealous and bent out of shape, but when you got saparividare, you know who you are. You rest confident in who you are. And if there's a fool in your life, you don't let them shake up the wisdom and the confidence of who God made you to be. If they want to be a fool, let them be a fool still. But you say, God, help me, Jesus, to be able to display your wisdom and act like somebody who's got some sense. Whenever you stoop to argue with a fool, they can't tell which one is the fool. Saparividare understands that I know what I'm looking at here, and I don't want to stoop to your level because you've not matured in your intelligence to have conversation with me. When you have cried until you can't cry anymore, you got saparividare and you realize it's not worth it, and I'm not going to shed another tear over this. I'm finished. I shed my last tear yesterday. I'm finished with that. I see differently now. You can keep on doing the same stuff. You might not have changed, but I have changed, and I have already separated myself. I've transcended now. You're not going to worry me. I've got saparividare. Are you listening to me? Anybody know what I'm talking about? In this life, if your peace is not going to be disturbed, you got to have saparividare and understand how to see. God, may you empower us to be able to see with your eyes, God, to look out at things in maturity. When things mess up on us and when they go wrong, that God, you will give us divine perspective to be able to have saparividare, or else you'll blame yourself for everything that goes wrong and you'll take the credit for everything that goes right. But when you understand saparividare, you understand God. He was before I came into the picture. He'll be here when I'm... That God will take all things, the good things and the bad things.
Thank you for watching Power for Living with Bishop Dale C. Bronner. Join us again next time for Power for Living, where revelation is power. Power for living.